The bedroom
They're getting
smelled of
closer. We
medicine
have
and
to move.
decay.
Everyone, hold
November
on! Let's
rain
go!
drummed
We're
against
ready!
the window panes of the small farmhouse in Macon, Georgia.
The time has
A
come.
rhythm
No more
as
delays.
steady
But the
and
preparations are
inevitable
not
as the
complete.
labored
We
breathing
are
of the
ready.
man in the bed. Earl Cunningham was 60 years old, though the cancer had aged him beyond his years. His hands, once strong enough to lift a 100-pound sack of flour, now trembled against the quilt his late wife had made decades ago. The morphine dulled the pain, but sharpened his memories, bringing them into focus with a clarity that felt almost cruel. His son, James, sat in the wooden chair beside the bed. 30 years old, broad-shouldered like his father, had been born to Earl's second wife, Eleanor, who had passed when James was only 3. Earl had raised the boy alone after that, a widower twice over, a man who had buried too many people he loved. Perhaps that was why father and son shared the same careful way of holding silence. Outside, the Georgia twilight faded to full dark. Earl shifted against his pillows, wincing despite the medication. "Son," James leaned forward. His father rarely called him that. Usually it was just his name or nothing at all. Earl Cunningham had never been a man of many words. "Yes, Dad. There's something I need to tell you." Earl's voice was rough, worn down like river stones. "Something I never told anyone. Not even your mother. Something about the war." James had heard his father's war stories before, the ones everyone heard: cooking for thousands of men, the time the stove exploded, the poker games in the mess tent. Safe stories, stories that revealed nothing. "Dad, you don't have to do this now. Save your strength." Earl's eyes, still sharp despite the morphine haze, fixed on his son with an intensity that made James stop talking. "You served in Korea. You know what it's like to follow orders you don't agree with." Earl paused, breathing hard. "I need you to understand why I did what I did. Before I go, I need someone to know." The rain intensified. James settled back in the chair, recognizing the futility of argument. When Earl Cunningham decided to speak, "You listened." "All right, Dad, I'm listening." Earl's hand moved to the nightstand, fumbling with the drawer. James helped him, pulling it open to reveal a small metal box. Inside were letters, dozens of them postmarked from places James had never heard his father mention. Stuttgart, Chattanooga, Chicago, all addressed in unfamiliar handwriting. December 1944. Earl began, his eyes closing as the memory took hold. "They told me I'd be cooking for German prisoners. Women. 47 of them." The farmhouse faded. The morphine and memory blended, pulling Earl backward through time, through 18 years, through all the carefully built walls he had constructed around that winter. The rain became snow. Georgia became Tennessee. And Earl Cunningham became young again, or at least younger, standing in Captain Margaret Dalton's office, with his hands clenched behind his back. December 1944. The war in Europe ground on, brutal and endless. Earl Cunningham was 42 years old, too old for combat, but young enough that the Army had found uses for him. Cooking. Always cooking, as if the only thing his hands were good for was feeding other men before they went off to die. He stood at attention in front of Captain Dalton's desk, his weathered face impassive. The captain was a tall woman with steel-gray eyes and a way of looking at you that made lying impossible. Earl respected her, which made what she was about to ask him all the harder. "At ease, Sergeant." Earl relaxed marginally. The office was warm, heated by a pot-bellied stove in the corner. Outside, snow fell on the Tennessee hills, covering everything in white silence. "I'm assigning you to a new detail," Dalton said without preamble. She never wasted words. "We're receiving 47 German prisoners, female auxiliary corps. They'll arrive tomorrow morning." Earl's jaw tightened. He had known this was coming. Rumors had been circulating through the camp for days, but knowing and accepting were different things. "Women, ma'am." "Yes, radio operators, nurses, clerks. Non-combatants technically, though. They served in occupied France." Dalton pulled out a file, scanned it briefly. "They've been in transit for 6 weeks. Processing centers, temporary facilities. The reports indicate severe malnutrition. Some are in critical condition." Earl said nothing. His mind was working, processing, rejecting. Dalton looked up from the file. Her eyes found his. "You have objections, Sergeant." He could have lied, should have lied, but Earl Cunningham had never been good at deception. "Ma'am, I signed up to fight Germans, not feed them." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, someone shouted orders. Boots crunched through snow. Dalton set down the file carefully. You signed up to follow orders, Sergeant. This is your order. With all due respect, ma'am, Earl kept his voice level. My boy would be old enough to fight if I had one. These women serve the same regime that's killing American boys every day. I don't see how feeding them properly serves our cause. The Geneva Convention isn't about our cause, Sergeant. It's about maintaining our humanity. Dalton's voice was hard but not unkind. These women are prisoners of war. That means we treat them according to international law. That means adequate nutrition, medical care, and basic dignity. Earl wanted to argue, wanted to say that dignity was earned, not given, that his daughter Sarah would have been 29 if she had lived if the influenza hadn't taken her in 1918 when she was just 7 years old, and there was nothing he could do but watch her starve as the fever killed her appetite day by day. He wanted to say that his wife Martha had died in 1940 heartbroken by grief that never healed, and that he had spent the last 4 years with nothing but rage and emptiness where love used to be. He wanted to say that feeding enemy soldiers felt like betraying every American boy who came through his mess hall with scared eyes and forced smiles before shipping out to places they might never come back from. But what he said was, yes, ma'am, understood. Dalton studied him for a long moment. I know this isn't easy. I know what you've lost. But I need you to do this professionally and humanely. Can you do that? Earl thought of Sarah's face, the hollow cheeks, the fever-bright eyes, the way she had whispered that she was hungry even though she was too sick to eat. Yes, ma'am, I can do my duty. After he left Dalton's office, Earl walked through the cold to the mess hall. The building was empty this time of day, the long table scrubbed clean, the kitchen quiet except for the hum of the refrigeration units. He stood in the doorway of the kitchen, looking at the space that had become his entire world. The big iron stoves, the industrial mixers, the walk-in pantries stocked with flour and sugar and coffee, and all the things that turned ingredients into meals, into fuel, into soldiers. Every surface was familiar. He knew each pot, each pan, each knife by touch alone. The same fingers that had held his daughter as she died, that had buried his wife, had found purpose only in this transforming raw ingredients into sustenance. He pulled the photograph from his breast pocket. Always there, always with him. Sarah at 6 years old before the sickness, smiling in the sunshine, holding a biscuit he had made her. She had loved his biscuits, loved the way they melted in her mouth, soft and buttery and safe. Little girl, he said quietly to the empty kitchen. Your daddy's about to do something he doesn't understand. The photograph didn't answer. It never did. He put it away and started making lists, inventory for tomorrow's breakfast. The first meal he would cook for the enemy. That night in his small room in the barracks, Earl met the others who would be working this detail. Lieutenant Sarah Brennan arrived first, her uniform crisp, despite the hour her face set in lines of controlled anger. She was 29 years old, the same age Sarah would have been. The thought hit Earl like a fist. Sergeant Cunningham, her voice was clipped professional. I want to make my position clear from the start. These prisoners are to receive minimum required rations as outlined in the Geneva Convention. Nothing more. No American generosity for the people who killed my brother at Normandy. Earl nodded slowly. I cook what I'm ordered to cook, ma'am. Good. See that you remember they're the enemy, not guests. After she left, Corporal Horace Perkins arrived, a lanky 22-year-old from the Tennessee mountains with a quick smile and uncertain eyes. He was young enough to be Earl's son. Sarge, Perkins shifted his weight from foot to foot. Is it true we're cooking for Nazis? Earl's voice went hard. Watch your mouth, son. They're German military. Not all of them are Nazis. And yes, we're going to follow our orders. Yes, Sarge. Sorry, Sarge. The last to arrive was Private Ben Matthews, the camp medic. 35 years old, steady and competent, with a doctor's careful way of looking at people. He and Earl had played cards together on slow evenings, shared coffee on cold mornings. As close to a friend as Earl allowed himself these days. Earl, Matthews sat down heavily. I've seen the medical reports on these women. Malnutrition, some severe. Respiratory infections. One case of scurvy. He paused. Scurvy, Earl, in 1944. Whatever you feel about them politically, they're in bad shape. Whatever you cook, make it count. Earl poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot he kept on the small stove, handed one to Matthews. "I'll do my duty, Ben. Same as always." "I know you will. Just remember that sometimes duty and compassion look the same." After Matthews left, Earl sat alone with his coffee and his thoughts. Tomorrow the enemy would arrive. Tomorrow he would feed them. Tomorrow he would do something that felt like betrayal and obligation in equal measure. He pulled out Sarah's photograph one more time. "I don't know what I'm doing, baby girl," he whispered. "I don't know if this is right, but it's what I'm ordered to do." In the photograph, Sarah smiled her 6-year-old smile, frozen in time, forever hungry, forever lost. Earl put the photograph away and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not. December 3rd, 1944. Dawn broke cold and gray over the Tennessee hills. Earl had been awake since 4 in the morning preparing. Habit drove him now. Measure the flour, cut the butter, mix the dough. These were rhythms his hands knew, motions that required no thought. He made regulation portions. Oatmeal, bread, coffee, the minimum required by Geneva Convention standards for prisoners of war. His movements were mechanical, efficient, empty of feeling. But something happened while he worked that he didn't plan. Muscle memory took over. He added butter to the oatmeal. Not much, just enough to make it creamy instead of thin. Martha's voice whispered through the years, "Feed people properly, feed them with dignity." He made extra bread. The dough would go bad otherwise, he told himself. Waste was a sin. His mother had taught him that during the lean years of his childhood. He made the coffee strong. Men needed strong coffee in winter. These weren't men, but the principle remained the same. Corporal Perkins noticed. "Sarge, that's more than regulation." Earl's voice was gruff. "I cook how I cook. You got a problem, take it to the captain." "No problem, Sarge, just observing." At 9 o'clock, the truck arrived. Earl watched from the kitchen window, his hands still automatically wiping down the counters, his eyes fixed on the canvas-covered vehicle that rumbled to a stop in front of the mess hall. When the women began to climb down, Earl felt something shift inside his chest. Some wall he had built carefully beginning to crack. They weren't soldiers. That was his first thought. They wore remnants of uniforms, yes, but they moved like ghosts, like shadows of people rather than people themselves. Skeletal frames and clothes too large. Faces pale and gaunt with eyes that had seen too much. One of them caught his attention. Young, maybe 20, with hollow cheeks and large dark eyes that reminded him so powerfully of Sarah during her illness that he had to look away. "No, don't you dare. Don't you dare make me see her in them." But the damage was done. The crack in the wall widened. Captain Dalton escorted the prisoners into the mess hall. They moved slowly, uncertainly, some helping others who could barely walk. Earl and his team began carrying out the food. The moment he entered the main hall, Earl felt 47 pairs of eyes on him, watching, wary, some afraid, some beyond fear in that place where emotion no longer reaches. He set down the first tray. Oatmeal steaming in bowls, thick slices of bread, cups of hot coffee. The women stared at the food as if it might be poisoned, as if it might be a trick, as if they couldn't quite believe it was real. One of them started crying, silently, tears running down her face, her hands shaking as they hovered over the bowl without touching it. Earl turned away uncomfortable. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. What had they been through? What had been done to them that a bowl of oatmeal made them cry? He went back to the kitchen, needing the familiar space, the enclosed walls, the distance from those haunted faces. Lieutenant Brennan followed him. "Sergeant," her voice was sharp, "those portions are excessive. That's rations for American soldiers, not prisoners." Earl kept his back to her, scrubbing a pot that was already clean. "Ma'am, those are standard mess hall portions. Same thing I serve the men." "That's exactly my point. They don't deserve the same as our men." Earl turned slowly, faced her, kept his voice carefully neutral. "Ma'am, I'm a cook. I cook food. I don't measure it based on who's eating it. If you have an issue with portions, take it up with Captain Dalton." The challenge hung between them. Brennan's jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Just turned and walked out, her spine rigid with anger. Perkins whistled low. "You got stoned, Sarge." Talking back to an officer like that. Wasn't talking back, was stating facts. Earl returned to his scrubbing. "Now get those brushes cleaned. We've got lunch to prep." But the image of that crying woman stayed with him, and the young one with Sarah's eyes, and all the others who looked like they had been hollowed out, and filled with nothing but fear and exhaustion. That afternoon, one of the prisoners approached the kitchen window. She was older than most of the others, maybe 28, with the bearing of someone who had once held authority. She spoke in halting English, her accent thick but comprehensible. "Excuse me, Herr Sergeant." Earl looked up from the vegetables he was chopping for dinner. "Yeah, I want to say thank you. The food, it is good. We have not seen such kindness in long time." Earl's hands paused mid-cut. Kindness. She had called it kindness, as if feeding people adequately was somehow exceptional, as if basic human decency had become rare enough to warrant gratitude. "Just doing my job, miss." "No," the woman shook her head. "This is more than job. This is mercy." Earl didn't know what to say to that, didn't want to examine too closely what it meant. So he nodded shortly and went back to his chopping, and the woman walked away, and he tried very hard not to think about the word mercy or what it implied about the world she had been living in. That night, alone in his room, Earl pulled out Sarah's photograph again. It had become a ritual, a conversation with the dead. "Martha," he said, addressing his wife's memory as much as his daughter's, "I don't know what I'm doing. They're supposed to be the enemy, but all I see are half-starved girls who look like they've been through hell. What would you do?" Martha's voice came to him from memory, soft and certain. "Feed them, Earl. Feed them the way Mama taught us, with dignity. I am feeding them. Feed them properly. The way you fed our Sarah. The way you would want someone to feed her if she was alone and afraid and starving in a foreign land." Earl put the photograph away. His hands were shaking slightly. From age, he told himself. From the cold. Not from the realization that he had already made his choice, that his hands had decided before his mind could object. The first week unfolded in a rhythm. Wake at 4, start the ovens, prepare breakfast, watch through the kitchen window as the women ate with a desperate carefulness that made his chest tight. Day 2, pancakes, bacon, eggs. The portions he made were standard military issue. That's what he told himself. He wasn't doing anything special. He was just cooking the way he always cooked. Day 3, biscuits and sausage gravy. His specialty. The recipe his mother had taught him, that he had taught Martha, that Martha had perfected until it became the taste of home itself. When he carried the trays out, he saw the young woman with Sarah's eyes staring at the plate in front of her with an expression of complete incomprehension. As if she had forgotten that food could look like this, smell like this, be this. She took her first bite, and Earl saw her face crumble. Saw her try to control it, to maintain composure, to keep from breaking down completely. Saw her fail. He turned away quickly, went back to the kitchen, leaned against the counter, and tried to breathe through the tightness in his chest. Perkins found him there. "Sarge, you okay?" "Fine, just tired." But he wasn't fine. Some barrier inside him was dissolving. Some anger he had carried for so long was beginning to transform into something else. Something that felt dangerously like compassion. By day 7, Private Matthews pulled him aside after breakfast service. "Earl, whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I've been monitoring their health. Weight gain, color returning, energy levels improving. Some of them wouldn't have made it through winter without proper nutrition." "I'm just following mess hall standards, Ben." Matthews gave him a long look. "Bullshit. I've eaten your standard food. You're putting in extra. The portions are larger. The quality is higher. Don't play dumb with me." Earl said nothing. "I'm not criticizing," Matthews continued. "I'm thanking you. You're saving lives, whether you want to admit it or not." After Matthews left, Earl stood in the empty kitchen and faced the truth. He was saving them. These enemy soldiers. These representatives of the regime that was killing American boys. These women who should have been nothing to him. He was saving them because he couldn't save Sarah. Because he couldn't save Martha. Because somewhere deep in muscle and bone, his body remembered how to care for people, even when his heart insisted it had forgotten. Lieutenant Brennan escalated her campaign. She filed a formal report documenting a 23% increase in food allocation to the prisoners. She confronted Earl in the mess hall during lunch service, her voice carrying across the room. "Sergeant Cunningham, me explain the discrepancy in rations." Earl faced her calmly. "Ma'am, I cook based on occupancy and availability. We have food. We have prisoners. I'm feeding them. The minimum required by Geneva Convention is significantly less than what you're providing. I'm aware of the minimum, ma'am. I'm also aware of what keeps people alive and healthy. If you want me to cook differently, get it in writing from Captain Dalton. It was insubordination barely veiled. The entire mess hall had gone silent. Prisoners and guards alike watched the confrontation with careful attention. Brennan's face flushed. For a moment, Earl thought she might relieve him of duty right there, but she just turned on her heel and walked out. That evening, Captain Dalton summoned Earl to her office. He went expecting a reprimand, possibly a demotion. He had pushed too hard, challenged an officer too publicly. Dalton sat behind her desk. Lieutenant Brennan's report spread out in front of her. She gestured for Earl to sit. He did his back straight, his face composed. Lieutenant Brennan filed a complaint about you. Yes, ma'am, I'm aware. She's not wrong. You are exceeding regulation minimums significantly. Yes, ma'am. Dalton leaned back in her chair. Why? The question hung in the air. Earl could have given her a dozen bureaucratic answers, could have talked about food waste and batch sizes and kitchen efficiency. Instead, he told the truth. Because I can't watch people starve, ma'am, even if they're the enemy. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I watched my daughter starve 26 years ago. Disease took her appetite. I couldn't do anything. Couldn't save her. These women, I can do something. I can feed them properly. Maybe it's not right. Maybe it's not what a good soldier should do, but it's what I can do. It's the only useful thing these hands are good for. Silence filled the office. Outside, snow began to fall again. Finally, Dalton spoke. My husband died at Pearl Harbor. I have every reason to hate Germans, to want revenge, to make them suffer. She met Earl's eyes. But we can't become the monsters we're fighting. We can't lose our humanity in the pursuit of victory. If we do, then what are we even fighting for? Ma'am, continue as you are, Sergeant. I'll handle Lieutenant Brennan. Feed them properly. Feed them with dignity. That's an order. Earl felt something in his chest loosen. Thank you, ma'am. Don't thank me. Just do good work. The next day, the young woman with Sarah's eyes approached the kitchen window again. This time, another woman was with her, older with skilled hands and a baker's careful way of moving. The baker spoke first in heavily accented English. Herr Sergeant Cunningham, may we speak? Earl came to the window, wiping his hands on his apron. What can I do for you? I am Betty. This is Grace, the baker gestured to the younger woman. We want to ask favor. Big favor. I'm listening. Betty took a breath as if gathering courage. I want to learn. You're cooking. You teach us? Please, Earl blinked surprised. You want to learn American cooking? Yes, my family owns bakery in Stuttgart. Before war, after war, we rebuild. I learn from you, I teach them. American techniques. Make something good from this bad time. Betty's eyes were earnest, desperate. You give us life with your food. We want give something back. Knowledge, exchange. Please. Earl didn't know how to respond. Teaching them felt like crossing another line, another step towards seeing them as human rather than enemy. But Grace spoke then, her English better than Betty's. Sergeant, you have been kind when you didn't have to be. This would mean everything to us. To have purpose again, to learn, to create instead of just survive. Earl thought of Martha teaching him to cook, thought of his mother's patient hands guiding his, thought of all the ways that knowledge passed between people became more than just information, became connection, became care. I'll ask the captain, he said finally. No promises. Betty's face lit up with the first genuine smile Earl had seen from any of the prisoners. Thank you. Thank you so much. After they left, Earl stood at the window and looked out at the snowy landscape beyond the camp. Something had shifted. Some decision had been made without his full consent. He was going to teach them. He was going to share the knowledge that Martha and his mother had given him. He was going to take these enemy soldiers and make them students. And somehow, impossibly, that felt right. That night, Earl sat in his room with a cup of coffee and Sarah's photograph. The morphine and memory pulled him back toward the present, back toward the farmhouse in Georgia, back toward his son waiting in the chair. But he wasn't ready to return yet. There was more to tell, more that James needed to understand. Captain Dalton approved the cooking program. 3 afternoons a week, small groups of prisoners could work in the kitchen under supervision. Educational training, she called it. Occupational development. Lieutenant Brennan objected formally but was overruled. The first session began on a cold Thursday afternoon. Betty Grace and three other women stood nervously in the kitchen while Earl pulled out ingredients for biscuits. He also brought out a small worn notebook, his mother's cookbook pages stained with flour and butter recipes written in faded pencil. "We're making biscuits," he said simply. "Southern style, light and fluffy. Anyone know how to make biscuits?" The women shook their heads. Grace translated for those whose English was limited. Earl began the demonstration. His hands moved with practiced certainty. Cut cold butter into flour. Add buttermilk. Don't overwork the dough. These were rhythms he could have performed in his sleep. But teaching them was different. Teaching them meant slowing down, explaining, letting them make mistakes. It meant reaching over to guide Betty's hands when she cut the butter wrong, showing her the gentle touch required. Like this, not fighting it, coaxing it. When Betty got it right, she smiled, and Earl smiled back before he could stop himself. Perkins, watching from across the kitchen, whispered to Matthews, "Never seen Sarge smile before." Matthews watched Earl patiently correct Grace's kneading technique. Maybe he needed a reason to. The session lasted 2 hours. By the end, they had made 4 dozen biscuits of varying quality. Some were perfect light and golden. Some were dense and misshapen. Earl made them taste both kinds. "See the difference, the good ones are gentle. You treated the dough with respect. The heavy ones, you forced it. Baking is like that. You can't bully ingredients into cooperation. You have to understand them." Grace translated, and the women nodded thoughtfully. As they cleaned up, Betty asked through Grace, "Why do you make it so soft? German bread is hard dense. This is like cloud." Earl paused, considering. "Different purpose. German bread is for sustenance, survival. This is comfort food. It's meant to make you feel safe, feel cared for." When Grace translated, something passed across the women's faces. An understanding, a hunger for exactly that feeling. Safety, care, things they hadn't felt in a very long time. After the women left, Earl sat alone in the kitchen, his worn cookbook still open on the counter. He looked at his mother's handwriting, at the stains and marks of decades of use. Maybe these hands could still do something worthwhile. Maybe feeding people, teaching people, creating moments of safety and care. Maybe that was enough. Maybe that was a purpose worth having. He pulled out Sarah's photograph one more time, looked at her 6-year-old face, forever young, forever lost. "I think I'm doing the right thing, baby girl," he whispered. "I think Mama would approve. I think you would too." The photograph didn't answer, but somehow in the warm kitchen, filled with the smell of fresh-baked biscuits, Earl felt closer to peace than he had in 26 years. And in the farmhouse in Georgia, 18 years later, Earl opened his eyes and looked at his son James, who had been listening in absolute silence. "That's how it started," Earl said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and morphine. "That's how I began to save them, and how they began to save me." James said nothing, just reached out and took his father's hand, holding it gently the way Earl had once held his daughter's hand all those years ago. Outside, the November rain continued to fall, washing the Georgia earth clean, carrying away the last remnants of a day that was ending, making way for whatever came next. The weeks that followed changed something fundamental in the camp. What began as simple cooking lessons evolved into something Earl hadn't anticipated, something that felt dangerously close to connection. January brought deeper cold to the Tennessee hills. Snow piled against the mess hall windows, muffling sound, turning the world white and silent. Inside the kitchen, warmth and the smell of baking bread created a space that felt separate from the war, from the camps, from everything beyond these walls. Earl found himself looking forward to the afternoon sessions. Not that he would admit it to anyone, least of all himself, but his hands moved with more purpose when he taught. His voice, usually gruff and minimal, found words to explain techniques he had performed by instinct for decades. Betty proved to be a natural. Her baker's training in Stuttgart gave her an understanding of dough, of timing, of the alchemy that transformed flour and water into sustenance. She asked questions constantly, her English improving. With each session, her hands learning the difference between German precision and American approximation. Grace translated when needed, but increasingly the language of cooking required no words. A gesture, a nod. Earl showing them through demonstration rather than explanation. Corporal Perkins had started helping with the sessions. The young man from the Tennessee mountains had an easy way about him, a lack of hatred that came from being too young to have lost much yet. Earl watched him laugh with Ruth, the silent farm girl from East Prussia, over a batch of pretzels that came out twisted beyond recognition. Sarge, Perkins said one afternoon as they cleaned up after the women had left. Can I ask you something? Earl continued, scrubbing the mixing bowl. Shoot. How do you do it? How do you not hate them? The question stopped Earl's hands. He set down the bowl, dried his hands on his apron, considered his words carefully. Who says I don't? Perkins looked surprised. You don't act like it. Hate's exhausting, son. I'm too old for it. Earl picked up the bowl again, resumed scrubbing. Besides, look at them. They're not the enemy. They're just people who got caught in something bigger than themselves, same as us. But they chose to serve. Did they? Earl's voice was quiet but firm. You think a 20-year-old girl in Germany in 1942 had many choices? You think she understood what she was choosing? Perkins said nothing for a long moment. Then softly, my sister's 20. If she'd been born over there instead of here, she might have made the same choice. Exactly. But Lieutenant Brennan didn't see it that way. Her campaign against what she called Earl's excessive fraternization intensified. She documented every extra portion, every smile, every moment of humanity that passed between captors and captives. Late one night, Earl found her alone in the administrative office. Through the window, he could see her writing another report, her face tight with concentration and barely controlled anger. He knocked on the door frame. She looked up, startled. Ma'am, can we speak plainly? Brennan's jaw tightened. Sergeant, if this is about my reports to command, that's not your concern. Earl stepped inside, closed the door. Ma'am, I know you lost your brother. I'm sorry for that. Truly. Don't, her voice cracked like ice. Don't presume to understand my loss. I lost my daughter, my wife. I understand loss plenty. Brennan stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. Then you should understand why this is wrong. Feeding the enemy like honored guests, teaching them, smiling with them, while American boys die every single day. Earl held his ground. I understand you're in pain. I understand pain makes us want revenge. But ma'am, your brother, what kind of man was he? How dare you bring him into this? Would he want you to become hard, to lose your compassion, to let hatred hollow you out until there's nothing left but anger? Earl's voice was gentle but relentless. Is that the legacy he'd want? The slap came fast. Brennan's hand connected with Earl's cheek, the sound sharp in the small office. Silence. Earl didn't move, didn't raise his hand to his face. Just stood there, absorbing the blow, understanding it for what it was. Not anger at him, grief with nowhere else to go. Brennan's hand shook. Her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. Get out, she whispered. Yes, ma'am. Earl left. His cheeks stung, but he felt no anger. Only sadness for a woman drowning in loss with no one to pull her back to shore. The letters arrived on a gray February morning. The International Red Cross postal system had finally caught up with the prisoners. Captain Dalton called an evening assembly to distribute them reading names from a list, while the German women waited with expressions ranging from desperate hope to barely contained dread. Earl watched from the kitchen doorway. He had stayed late ostensibly to prep for tomorrow's breakfast, but really because some instinct told him this moment mattered. These letters would change things. Of the 47 women, only 19 received mail. The silence when a name wasn't called was worse than any sound. It meant families in cities that no longer existed. It meant addresses buried under rubble. It meant people swallowed by the Eastern Front, by Soviet occupation, by the grinding machinery of total war. Betty received a letter. Earl watched her hands shake as she took the envelope, watched her face crumble as she read. Grace received one too. She read it standing perfectly still, her face draining of color with each line. Ruth received nothing, just stood there hoping until the last name was called and it wasn't hers. Then she sat down carefully, as if her legs had forgotten how to hold her weight. After the assembly, Earl found Betty in the supply shed behind the mess hall. She was sobbing the kind of deep, wrenching sobs that come from a place beyond language. He had never been good with crying women, had been helpless when Martha cried, had frozen when Sarah whimpered with fever. But something made him step into the shed, made him clear his throat quietly. Miss Betty, you all right? She looked up, her face wet with tears, her hands clutching the letter like it might dissolve if she let go. She tried to speak, choked on the words, tried again. My father, sick, heart. She pressed her hand to her chest. No medicine, no doctor who can help. Earl moved closer slowly like approaching a wounded animal. Betty's English fractured under the weight of her grief. My Schwester, sister, 16 years old, working in factory, for food rations. They make bread from sawdust, from potato skins. The tears came harder. Mother says I am lucky, lucky to be prisoner, because here I eat, here I am safe, while they starve. The words hit Earl like physical blows. He thought of Sarah, thought of watching her waste away helpless to stop it, thought of Martha's grief consuming her from the inside. He did something he almost never did. He reached out and put his hand on Betty's shoulder. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm so damn sorry. Betty looked up at him through her tears. Why you care? We are enemy. Earl's hand stayed on her shoulder, steady, warm, real. Because you're human, that's enough. You are good man, Sergeant Cunningham. Too good for this war. Ain't no such thing as too good, just men trying to do right in a wrong world. Later that evening, Grace found Earl in the kitchen. He was preparing tomorrow's dough, his hands working the familiar rhythms, finding comfort in repetition. Sergeant Cunningham. He looked up. Grace stood in the doorway, her letter folded carefully in her hands, her eyes red but dry. She had cried herself empty. What is it, Miss Grace? She held out the letter. May I tell you what it says? Earl wiped his hands on his apron. If you want to. Grace's voice was steady, but each word cost her. My sister Kate. She is in displaced persons camp near Hamburg. Our building was destroyed in July. Firebombing. Mother is alive but sick. Respiratory problems from living in unheated shelter. Kate works in factory. The rations they receive. Sergeant, they are eating tulip bulbs. Anything that might have nutrition. Earl said nothing, just listened. Kate wrote this line. Grace's voice finally broke. She wrote, we are glad you are captured. At least there you have food. The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the cooling ovens. How do I eat, Sergeant? Grace looked at him with desperate eyes. How do I sit at that table tomorrow and eat bacon and eggs when my family is eating flower bulbs? When my mother is dying because there is no heat and no medicine? How do I swallow food knowing each bite is a betrayal? Earl set down the dough, came around the counter, faced this young woman who looked so much like Sarah that it hurt. You eat because refusing won't feed them, he said slowly. You eat because you need strength to help them later. You eat because surviving isn't betrayal. He paused, remembering his own years of grief. I spent a long time thinking that if I suffered enough, it would mean something. That if I punished myself, it would honor the people I lost. It doesn't. Suffering doesn't honor the dead. Living well does. You sound like you know this. I do. Lost people I couldn't save. But I learned something. The only way to honor them is to keep living. Keep helping who you can. Keep choosing good when you're able. Grace nodded slowly, then quietly. What if good isn't enough? It never is, but it's something. And something is better than nothing. That night's dinner was torture. Pork chops, mashed potatoes with real butter, green beans cooked with bacon. The abundance felt obscene. Earl watched the women struggle with their food, watched some unable to eat at all, watched others eat mechanically while tears ran down their faces. Betty pushed her plate away untouched. Ruth ate without tasting, her eyes empty. Grace forced down each bite like swallowing broken glass. Private Matthews found Earl after dinner washing dishes with more force than necessary. Earl, you holding up all right? How do you do it, Ben? Earl's hands stilled in the soapy water. You're a medic. You see suffering every day. How do you not break? Matthews leaned against the counter. I do break, every night. Then I get up in the morning and help who I can. That's all any of us can do. It doesn't feel like enough. Matthews looked at him steadily. No, but doing nothing feels worse. Earl nodded, understanding. The words he'd given Grace earlier that evening echoed back to him through Matthews' different phrasing. Something was always better than nothing, even when it felt inadequate. That night, Earl couldn't sleep. He sat at the small desk in his room, pulled out a piece of paper, and did something he rarely did. He wrote, not a letter, not a report, just words, thoughts he couldn't speak aloud. Sarah, I think I'm losing my mind. I'm defending people who would have killed you if you'd lived a fighting age. But I can't watch them starve. I can't watch them break under guilt and grief. I see you in their faces. I see Martha in their tears. God forgive me, I can't stop seeing the people I lost in these enemy soldiers. Is this weakness? Is this betrayal? Or is this finally, after 26 years, learning what you and Martha always knew? That feeding someone is an act of love. That caring for the hungry is never wrong no matter who they are. I don't know anymore. I just know that my hands remember how to be useful. And maybe that's enough. He folded the paper, put it with Sarah's photograph, and tried to sleep. The next morning, Earl made a decision. He found Captain Dalton in her office before breakfast, knocked on the door frame, waited for permission to enter. Sergeant Cunningham, early visit. What can I do for you? Earl stood at attention, then relaxed slightly when she gestured. Ma'am, I want to propose something, probably stupid, probably against regulations, but I think it's necessary. Dalton set down her pen. I'm listening. A dinner, Sunday, prisoners and guards together, same tables, same food, breaking bread together. The silence stretched. Dalton studied him carefully. That's unprecedented, Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. It could go wrong in 100 different ways. Yes, ma'am, but it could also go right. Why, when Dalton leaned forward. Why do you care so much? These aren't your people. Earl met her eyes. They're all my people, ma'am. Every hungry person is my people. I couldn't save my daughter, but I can save these women. Maybe that's my purpose in this war. Maybe that's all the purpose I need. Dalton was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I'll need to clear it with command. It'll take a few days, heightened security, my full responsibility if anything goes wrong. Understood, ma'am. Why now, Sergeant? Why this specific moment? Earl thought of Betty crying in the shed, of Grace's hollow eyes, of all the women struggling under the weight of survivor's guilt. Because they're drowning, ma'am, in guilt, in grief, in the impossible contradiction of being safe while their families suffer. We can't fix that, but we can show them that there's still humanity in this world, that not everything is cruelty, that sometimes, even in war, people can sit together and remember they're all just human. Dalton nodded again. I'll make it happen. The next 3 days felt like waiting for a verdict. Earl went through his routines, cooked breakfast, lunch, dinner, led the afternoon teaching sessions, but his mind was elsewhere, planning, worrying, hoping. Lieutenant Brennan filed a formal objection when she learned of the plan. Earl heard about it from Perkins, who had overheard her arguing with Captain Dalton. She called it dangerous fraternization, Sarge, said you were treating them like friends instead of prisoners, said it was a betrayal of every American soldier. Earl said nothing, just kept kneading the bread dough, his hands working the familiar patterns. On Friday afternoon, Brennan confronted him directly, stormed into the kitchen where he was teaching Betty and Grace how to make cornbread. This is insane. Her voice was sharp enough to cut. You're treating them like guests, like friends. Have you forgotten what they are? Earl wiped his hands calmly. No, ma'am, I'm treating them like human beings. They're Germans. They're the enemy. They're 20-year-old girls who've been starved and scared and traumatized. Earl's voice stayed level. They're somebody's daughters, somebody's sisters. My brother was somebody's brother, and they killed him. No, ma'am, the war killed him. The war killed a lot of people. But we don't have to let it kill our humanity, too. Brennan's face crumpled. The anger cracked, revealed the grief underneath. I don't know how to not be angry. The anger is all I have left of him. Earl's voice gentled. I know. I carried anger for my daughter for 20 years. It didn't bring her back. It just made me hollow. He paused. Don't let it hollow you out, ma'am. Your brother wouldn't want that. Brennan left without another word, but something in her posture had changed. Some rigidity had softened. Saturday morning approval came through. The Sunday dinner was authorized. Heightened security, armed guards, Captain Dalton's full responsibility. Captain Dalton had added one more element to the plan. 10 male German prisoners from the work camp 15 miles north would be invited as guests. Earl had been surprised by this. Why the men, ma'am? Because some of these women might have known them before the war, Dalton explained. Because seeing familiar faces, hearing familiar names might remind them that they're not the only Germans trying to survive this exile. Because mercy should extend to everyone, not just the women in our care. Earl had nodded. One more bridge to build, one more barrier to break. Earl began preparing immediately. He invited Betty and Grace to help plan the menu. They decided together. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, fresh bread, and for dessert, an apple cake from a recipe Helen, the German nurse, remembered from her grandmother. The preparation became a collaboration. German women working alongside American soldiers. Laughter in the kitchen for the first time. Arguments, playful ones, about seasoning. Language barriers dissolving in the universal language of cooking. Perkins taught Ruth how to make chess pie, the Tennessee specialty. She taught him the proper way to make spätzle, laughing at his clumsy attempts to form the little dumplings. Earl watched them, these young people finding connection across enemy lines, and felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe. Or just the recognition that kindness could survive anything, even war. Sunday morning dawned clear and cold. Earl arrived at the kitchen at 4 in the morning, beginning the preparations. Betty and Grace joined him an hour later, then Helen, then Ruth. They worked in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by quiet conversation. Earl showed Helen how to carve the chicken properly. Like this. With respect. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. By noon, the mess hall was ready. The tables had been rearranged, not separate sections for guards and prisoners. Mixed seating, Americans and Germans together. Earl stood in the kitchen doorway looking at the transformed space and felt his heart beating hard against his ribs. This was it. This was the moment that would either prove his belief in human goodness or shatter it completely. Captain Dalton found him there. Nervous, Sergeant. Yes, ma'am. Good. If you weren't nervous, I'd worry about your judgment. She paused. This is a good thing you're doing. Whatever happens, remember that. At 1 o'clock, people began to file in. Guards, prisoners. The 10 male German prisoners arriving last, escorted and nervous. All uncertain. Earl watched them take their seats, watched the careful way they avoided eye contact, the tension in their shoulders. Then he walked to the front of the room. Public speaking had never been his strength. He was a cook, not an orator. But this needed to be said. I'm not good with words, he began, his voice gruff, but carrying. I'm a cook, but I know this. Food is meant to bring people together. In my mama's house, everyone ate at the same table. Rich, poor, friend, stranger, didn't matter. You sat down, you ate, you were family for that meal. Grace translated his words into German, her voice steady. Today, that's what we're doing. We're family for this meal. Not German, not American, just people, just family. The room was silent. Then Earl nodded to his team and they began bringing out the food. The morphine pulled Earl back to the present. The bedroom in Macon. The rain against the windows. His son's face shadowed in the lamplight. Earl paused in his telling. James leaned forward. Dad, you should rest. Earl shook his head weakly. Not yet. You need to hear what happened next. You need to understand. I understand, Dad. You showed them mercy. You treated them like humans. No. Earl's eyes opened, focused on his son with surprising intensity. That's not the important part. The important part is what happened when we all sat down together. When the food was served. When the barriers finally broke. James settled back in his chair. Then tell me. Earl closed his eyes again, sinking back into memory, back into that winter afternoon when everything changed. Back to the mess hall. Back to the moment when 47 German prisoners and 30 American soldiers sat down together and broke bread. Back to the moment when Earl Cunningham learned that some miracles are simple as shared meals. The food was served family style. Large platters placed in the center of each table. Roasted chicken golden and fragrant. Mashed potatoes steaming in serving bowls. Green beans glistening with butter. Fresh bread still warm from the oven. Earl watched from the kitchen doorway as people hesitated. Guards and prisoners sitting side by side, uncertain who should serve first, how much to take, whether this fragile piece would hold or shatter. Then Betty reached for the chicken platter, served herself a modest portion, passed it to the American corporal seated next to her. He took it surprised and passed it on. And just like that, the ice broke. Conversation started slowly, stilted attempts at communication across language barriers. But food has a way of softening edges, of making strangers into something else. Earl had assigned himself to a table near the back. Betty sat to his right, Grace to his left. Across from him sat a young German man, one of the male prisoners from the work camp. He had been quiet during the meal, eating carefully, watching Betty with growing recognition. The young man looked at Betty, looked again, his face transforming with shock and disbelief. Betty? Betty Schmidt. Betty's fork clattered against her plate. Her hand flew to her mouth. Klaus Muller. They spoke in rapid German words, tumbling over each other. Earl didn't understand the language, but he understood the emotion. Neighbors, friends from before the war, two people from the same street in Stuttgart finding each other in a prison camp in Tennessee, thousands of miles from home. Betty began to cry. Klaus reached across the table and took her hands. They both cried, laughing and weeping at once, the impossible coincidence of this meeting breaking something open in both of them. Grace translated quietly for Earl. They lived 3 doors apart. Klaus's mother and Betty's mother were friends. They used to play together as children. Earl watched them, feeling something tight in his chest. This was what war did. Scattered people like seeds in a hurricane, then occasionally impossibly brought them back together in moments of grace that felt like miracles. Klaus turned to Earl, his eyes wet, his English, heavily accented but comprehensible. You are sergeant, who feeds them, yes. Who teaches Betty to cook. I'm the cook, yes. Betty's mutter wrote to my mother. Letter came 3 weeks ago. She said if Betty lives, if she survives, it is because of American kindness. Because of you. Klaus's voice cracked. Thank you. Thank you for keeping my friend alive. Earl shifted uncomfortably. I follow my orders, feed people properly. Nothing more than that. No, Klaus shook his head firmly. You give hope. That is more than cooking. That is everything. At another table, Corporal Perkins sat between Ruth and a German prisoner named Margot. He was trying to explain a joke about chickens crossing roads, the translation getting mangled. Nobody quite understanding the punchline, but everyone laughing anyway at the absurdity of trying to translate American humor into German. Ruth smiled. Earl had never seen her smile before. It transformed her face, made her look young instead of ancient, alive instead of merely surviving. Perkins taught her the English word for delicious. She taught him the German, schmackhaft. He butchered the pronunciation so badly that the entire table erupted in laughter, and he laughed too, red-faced and good-natured. At a third table, Lieutenant Brennan sat rigid and silent, eating mechanically, her face carefully blank. Helen, the German nurse, sat beside her. For most of the meal, neither spoke. Then Helen said quietly in careful English, Lieutenant, I am sorry for your brother. Brennan's fork paused halfway to her mouth. How did you know about him? I am nurse. I see grief in faces. I know the look. Helen's voice was gentle. I am sorry. War takes too many good people. Brennan set down her fork. Her hands trembled slightly. He was. Good, I mean. He was the good one in our family. I had cousin, in Wehrmacht, sent to Russian front. Also good man. He wrote letters about wanting peace, wanting to go home, wanting to study medicine. Helen paused. He died at Stalingrad. War takes the best, leaves the broken. For a long moment, neither woman spoke. Then Brennan said, voice barely above a whisper, I'm tired of being angry. I know, anger is exhausting, but grief underneath that is worse. How do you bear it? Helen looked at her plate, at the abundance there, at the miracle of being alive and fed and safe. I remember them. I honor them by living, by choosing kindness when I can, by not letting their deaths make me cruel. Private Matthews, seated on Helen's other side, watched this exchange with careful attention. He had seen enough suffering to recognize healing when it happened. Even small healing, even tentative first steps. The apple cake was served warm with fresh cream. Helen's grandmother's recipe made with cinnamon and love, with the memory of peacetime baking. When Betty tasted it, tears ran down her face again. Like home, she whispered. Like before everything. Earl understood. Food carried memory, carried love across time and distance. This cake tasted like a Stuttgart kitchen, like a grandmother's patient teaching, like Sunday afternoons when the world made sense. That's what food should be, he said quietly. A reminder that home still exists even when you can't reach it. After dessert, Klaus stood, asked permission to speak. Captain Dalton nodded. He spoke in halting English, choosing each word carefully. I want to thank all Americans here. You did not have to be kind. We are enemy. We fight on wrong side of history. We know this now, but you treat us like mention, like humans. We not forget this. Never forget. Other German prisoners stood in solidarity, nodding, some crying, all bearing witness to this strange mercy they had received. Earl stood reluctantly. All eyes turned to him. He hated being the center of attention, but some things needed saying. We're all just trying to survive this war and get home, he said simply. If we can help each other do that, we should, that's all. The understatement was classic Earl Cunningham. Profound truth wrapped in plain words. James would recognize this later when his father told him the story, would recognize it as the core of who his father was. A man who believed in action over words and kindness, over philosophy and doing right, because it was possible, not because it was easy. The dinner ended peacefully. No incidents, no fights, no breaches of the fragile trust that had been built. People lingered afterward, talking, laughing, exchanging addresses with permission, promising to write after the war. Earl cleaned the kitchen alone that night. He preferred it that way. The solitary work, the familiar rhythms, the quiet after the intensity of the evening. Matthews found him there. That was something, Earl. Earl scrubbed a pot, his hands working automatically. It was just a meal. It was a miracle. Don't believe in miracles, just believe in doing right when you can. Same thing, maybe. Earl said nothing, just kept scrubbing. The week after the dinner, Lieutenant Brennan withdrew her complaints. She met Earl in the kitchen early one morning before anyone else arrived. Sergeant Cunningham, I need to apologize. Earl looked up from the coffee he was making. No need, ma'am. Yes, there is. Brennan's voice was firm. I was wrong about you, about this. I let my grief make me cruel. My brother would have been ashamed of me. You weren't wrong to be angry, ma'am. Just wrong about where to direct it. I'm recommending you for commendation, for exceptional service. Please don't. Earl's response was immediate. I don't want recognition. I just want to keep cooking, keep doing my job. Brennan studied him for a long moment, then nodded. As you wish, but know that what you did here mattered. It changed things, changed me. After she left, Earl stood alone with his coffee, watching dawn break over the snowy hills. Changed things, he supposed it had, but not in ways he could quantify or explain. Just small shifts, small moments of choosing humanity over hatred. February brought more letters, more devastating news from Germany, but also something unexpected. Families writing that their daughters, their sisters, should stay safe, should not rush back into starvation and chaos, giving permission and careful words for survival. Ruth finally received word, not from her parents but from a neighbor who had escaped west. Her parents and brother had been killed when Soviet forces overran their village in January. The farm was gone. Everything was gone. The neighbor wrote simply, "There is nothing left for you here. Stay where you are safe." It is what they would have wanted. Earl found Ruth standing alone outside the mess hall, the letter in her hands, her face dry but empty. "Miss Ruth, you all right?" She looked at him with eyes that had seen the end of everything. "Now I know. Before I hoped. Now I know. It is better, maybe, to know. I'm sorry. Don't be. You give me future. They cannot. I will honor them by living, by choosing life." She paused. "Corporal Perkins asks if he can write to me. I say yes. Is that wrong? It's life. Life is never wrong." Grace received a letter from her mother. Through tears, she translated it for Earl. "Your sister and I want you to live. We want you to eat. We want you to be strong. Do not feel guilty for being safe. That is our gift to you. Live, Liebchen. Live for all of us." Betty's father wrote similar words. "Stay where you are fed. Stay where you are safe. Come home when you are strong enough to help us rebuild." The letters were releases from guilt, permissions to survive, but they didn't make the choice easier. March brought official notifications, repatriation procedures, transportation scheduled for late April. All prisoners must indicate their willingness to return to Germany. Captain Dalton conducted individual meetings. Earl didn't attend these, but he saw their effects, saw the women wrestling with impossible choices. One evening, he found Grace in the kitchen after dinner. She was sitting at the prep table staring at nothing. "Miss Grace, you all right?" She looked up. "Sergeant, if you could choose, if you could stay here safe and fed or go back to your family who is suffering, what would you do?" Earl sat down across from her. "That's not a fair question. Life is not fair." "No, it's not." He was quiet for a moment. "What does your heart tell you?" "My heart says stay. Help my family from here. Bring them here when I can. Make money. Send it back. Be strong so I can help them properly." She paused. "But my guilt says I am abandoning them." "Your guilt is lying to you. Going back weak and hungry doesn't help them. Coming back strong with resources, with knowledge, with the ability to actually make a difference, that helps." "You think so?" "I know so. I've seen enough suffering to know that good intentions don't feed people. Practical help does. If you can provide that help better from here, then staying is the right choice." Grace nodded slowly. "Some of us are thinking of asking for displaced person status. To stay in America. Is that wrong?" "It's survival. Survival isn't wrong." 11 women ultimately requested to stay. Betty wanted to return to help her family's bakery to rebuild. Ruth wanted to stay, having nothing to return to. Grace wanted to stay to bring her family over eventually. Helen wanted to stay to continue nursing to start fresh. The 36 who chose repatriation left on a cold April morning. Earl cooked them a final breakfast. Biscuits and gravy. One last taste of the food that had sustained them. Betty cried as she hugged him goodbye. "Thank you, Sergeant, for everything, for my life." She pressed a letter into his hands. "From my mother. She wanted you to know what you did, how much it meant." Earl tucked the letter into his pocket, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. Klaus shook his hand firmly. "You are a good man, Sergeant Cunningham. I hope we meet again. In peace." "I hope so too." The trucks pulled away. Earl stood watching until they disappeared, feeling the weight of endings, the bittersweetness of having saved someone, only to watch them drive back into danger. The 11 who stayed began the complex process of displaced persons applications. Earl vouched for them, offered to help them find work. He knew restaurant owners in Macon, knew people who would give them a chance. May brought victory in Europe. The war ended, but Earl felt no particular joy, just exhaustion. Just the knowledge that something was finished, but the cost had been astronomical. The camp began to close down. Prisoners were processed for release. Earl received transfer orders. His work here was done. Grace found him on his last day packing his few possessions in the small room he had occupied for 18 months. "Sergeant, I want you to know, you saved my life, not just my body, my soul. You showed me that kindness still exists." Earl didn't know what to say. "You take care of your family, you hear?" "I will, because you taught me how." After the camp closed, Earl returned to Macon, to his small farm, to the silence of living alone. But this time the silence was different, less empty, more contemplative. Letters began to arrive. From Betty in Stuttgart, 1946. "The bakery is open again. I use your recipes. People love them. They call them American-German friendship bread. Thank you for everything." From Ruth in Chattanooga, 1948. "Horace and I are married. We opened a restaurant, German and American food. You should visit. You will always have a free meal here." From Grace in Chicago, 1947. "My mother and sister are here. We are together. Mother cried when I made biscuits for her. She said they taste like hope." Earl kept every letter in a metal box. Read them when loneliness pressed too hard. These women scattered across America and Germany, rebuilding their lives. These lives he had helped save. In 1955, Ruth visited with Perkins and their 2 children. Brought the oldest, a boy of 5. "Earl, this is Earl Jr., named after you." Earl held the small hand, looked into the child's curious eyes, felt something crack open in his chest. Legacy. Continuation. The future built on small acts of kindness. In 1958, Betty wrote asking if he was happy, telling him about her daughter learning to bake, learning the recipes he had taught, asking him to please tell them he had found some peace. Earl stared at that letter for days, then wrote back, "I'm content. That's enough." In 1960, Grace visited with her entire family. Her elderly mother wanted to meet the man who had saved her daughters. Through Grace translating, the old woman thanked him, told him he had shown her that Americans were good people, that one person's kindness could change everything. Then came the diagnosis, late 1961, lung cancer, terminal, 6 months, maybe less. Earl wrote to the women, simple letters, "I'm sick, don't know how long, wanted you to know." They all offered to visit. He declined. "You have your lives, live them well. That's all I need." But he wrote to James, asked his son to come home, said there were things that needed saying. Now the story complete, Earl opened his eyes and looked at his son. "That's the story," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "That's what I did. That's why I needed you to know." James had been silent for hours listening. Now he leaned forward, took his father's hand. "Dad, why tell me this now? Why does it matter so much that I know?" Earl's grip was weak but steady. "Because you served in Korea. You saw things, did things. You came back angry, closed off, like I was after Sarah died." James flinched. His father saw too much, even dying. "I can see you carrying weight," Earl continued. "Guilt about something. Pain you won't talk about." "I know because I carried the same weight." James's voice cracked. "Dad, I did things over there. Followed orders that felt wrong. Hurt people who maybe didn't deserve it. I don't know how to live with that." Earl squeezed his son's hand. "Those German girls taught me something. War makes us do terrible things, but we're not defined by what war makes us do. We're defined by what we choose afterward. I don't know what to choose. Then let me help you choose." Earl pulled out the envelope he had prepared. Inside were addresses: Betty in Stuttgart, Ruth in Chattanooga, Grace in Chicago. "After I'm gone, I want you to visit them, learn their stories, see what became of the seeds we planted." "Dad, I don't understand." "You will. You'll see how small acts of kindness ripple forward, how feeding someone can change the course of their life, how choosing good, even when it's hard, creates something that lasts." Earl paused, breathing hard. "Maybe it'll help you forgive yourself. Maybe it'll show you a way forward." James took the envelope with shaking hands. Earl pulled out one more thing, his mother's cookbook, worn-stained, filled with recipes and faded handwriting. "This was my mama's, then mine. Now it's yours." "Dad, I don't know how to cook." Earl smiled weakly. "Then learn. It's never too late to learn how to care for people. And that's what cooking is, son. It's caring made tangible. It's love you can taste." They sat together in silence as darkness fell. Earl's breathing grew more labored. James held his father's hand, feeling the life slowly leaving him. "Tell them," Earl whispered. "Tell them I said thank you. They saved me more than I saved them." Those were his last words. He died peacefully in the early hours of the morning, with his son beside him, with rain falling on the Georgia earth, washing everything clean. The funeral was small. Local people who had known Earl as a quiet, reliable man, a good neighbor, a decent person. None of them knew about the German prisoners, about the kitchen in Tennessee, about the lives he had saved. But 3 women arrived from across the country and across the ocean. Betty from Stuttgart, Ruth from Chattanooga, Grace from Chicago. James met them at the service. They embraced him like family. Betty handed him a package. "Breads from my bakery, made with your father's recipes. Share them. Let people taste what kindness tastes like." Ruth brought photographs, her restaurant, her children, her life built on the foundation Earl had provided. "Your father gave me everything. I want you to know that." Grace brought a letter. "This is from all 47 of us. We found each other over the years, wrote this together, for him." James read the letter at the funeral. His voice broke multiple times, but he finished. "We were 47 women who had lost everything. We were starving, broken, certain that cruelty was all that remained. Then Sergeant Earl Cunningham fed us. Not just food, but dignity. He treated us like humans when we had forgotten we were human. Some of us returned to Germany and rebuilt. Some stayed in America and started new. All of us carried forward the lesson he taught. That kindness is the most powerful force in existence. His legacy is written in every meal we cook, every person we feed, every kindness we extend." Thank you, Sergeant. Thank you for everything. After the funeral, James began his journey. In 1963, he visited Betty in Stuttgart, saw her thriving bakery, tasted the American-German fusion breads, learned about his father's impact from an ocean away. Betty's daughter asked him, "Is it true your grandfather saved my mother?" "Yes, by feeding her biscuits." The girl looked confused. Biscuits changed the world. Kindness changed the world. Biscuits were just the vehicle. In 1965, he visited Ruth and Perkins in Chattanooga. Ate at their restaurant, met Earl Jr., now a teenager, who carried his namesake's quiet strength. Perkins told him, "Your dad set us up, vouched for Ruth, helped us get started. We owe everything to him." In 1967, James visited Grace in Chicago. Met her family, her children saw how one act of compassion had rippled across generations. Grace's oldest son said, "My mom says your dad was the best man she ever met besides my father." What else does she say? That one act of kindness can ripple through generations. That we should always feed hungry people. That love tastes like biscuits. By 1968, James had changed. The weight he carried from Korea felt lighter. Not gone, but manageable. His father's story had shown him a path forward. He quit his job, became a counselor for Vietnam veterans, used cooking as therapy, teaching traumatized young men to create instead of destroy, to nourish instead of harm. In his kitchen, with a group of broken veterans, James taught them to make biscuits. His father's recipe, his grandmother's wisdom. Love made tangible. One vet asked, "How does cooking fix anything?" James answered with his father's words, "It doesn't fix, it reminds. Reminds you that you can create instead of destroy. That you can nourish instead of harm. That you're more than what war made you." He showed them his father's cookbook, worn and flour-dusted. "My father was just a cook, but he changed the world one biscuit at a time. So can you." The young men made biscuits. Some cried, some laughed. All healed slowly in small increments through the simple act of creating something good. And Earl Cunningham's legacy lived on. In Betty's bakery in Stuttgart. In Ruth's restaurant in Chattanooga. In Grace's kitchen in Chicago. In James's therapy sessions for broken soldiers. In every meal cooked with care. In every hungry person fed with dignity. In every moment when someone chose kindness over cruelty, compassion over hatred, love over war. One man, one kitchen, 47 lives saved. And the ripples spreading outward, touching thousands, proving that even in the darkest times, a single act of mercy can illuminate the world.